little bit more comprehensive. And borrowing from some other peer programs who are willing to share information, I put together this document for this year. And Jennifer, just to double check, can you see that? Is that okay?
Thumbs up.
So, so right now, this is a 16-page or so fellowship application guidebook that has a little letter from Jennifer and I, and then has a lot of sort of resources for you, important websites and resources, and timeline and links for things, and you know, some frequently asked questions. There's some discussion about taking a year off, delaying for more research, table with costs and finances. This will be in my slide talk. How to get information about programs. Anyway, you can see as I scroll through here, there's a lot of information on writing personal statements and how to do the Eris application. And then coming soon, I will have sections on interviewing and on post-interview communication, because one thing I should also say very early on is I'm not going to cover the interview process and post-interview communications today. I thought about that, but quite honestly, I think that might be better for you if we do it in August as just-in-time training, so to speak, since interviews will usually start mid to late August for fellowship programs. And so we're going to do another session at that time, and we'll pick a date and let you guys know to cover these two topics. And then I'll fill out this document. So it's currently at 16 pages. And I hope that you'll find that helpful, and as a supplement. Some of it will repeat what I'm going to say today. Some of it will supplement and extend it. But again, I hope that's helpful. The other reason to wait, I should be sort of explicit, is that we don't yet know exactly what the interview season's going to look like for fellowship interviews, whether it'll be virtual again like it was last year, or whether it will be all in person, or whether programs will offer some sort of a hybrid. And so I think we'll be able to give you a little bit better advice, you know, closer to that time as well. So I hope that you guys will find that helpful. And I see this as a document that will just grow with time, and we'll edit and modify every year to make it helpful for you guys. The other document that I want to share with you, because I've made it available to people every year. I send out, you know, where people have matched, but we don't really have sort of a list of where graduates have gone. And not that it's a very difficult thing to do. So I put together this little Excel spreadsheet that currently has 4 years worth of data in it, the 2017, 18, 19, and 2020 match. It's an Excel spreadsheet so that you can sort it. And so by fellowship, specialty, by program, where the person matched, the name of the resident who matched into that program, and the year that they matched there. And again, you can sort this by your own specialty, or you could sort it by institution. If you're going to interview, you know, in Colorado, in, you know, HEMONC, you can still reach out to Chris Kovach and ask him, you know, how he likes working at that institution. So again, I hope that you find this helpful. Right now, it's almost 120 people at various programs across the country, and I will continue to build this for you guys as well. So So I hope those things wind up being helpful for you. Okay, well, let's then, now I have to find my PowerPoint. Okay, so let's actually really dive in. And with me showing my slides and also looking at a gallery of you, I may not be able to also follow the chat. So Jennifer, are you going to be on for the most of the session? Okay, so maybe you can help monitor the questions. And please, let's be informal. Yes, I'm going to go through this as a presentation, but you know, it's just us. Please feel free to, you know, interject and ask questions. Either unmute yourself and or put it in the chat. I don't feel that we need to wait till the end for questions. So, all right. Well, first, my disclosures. A lot of what you're going to hear is opinion. It's my opinion or the opinion of residents of ours who've gone through the process, or opinions of some fellowship directors I've talked to, you know, and so you really have to realize that even within a specialty, different programs are looking for different things, and you just have to, you know, have that perspective when you, you know, see kind of some of the things that we'll recommend. Is that you may get slightly different advice from a very close mentor of yours, or for one program, you may want to do something one way and differently for a different program. So this is not gospel by any means, but it does represent sort of my 15 years, almost 15 years of advising people on the fellowship process. I want to take a second too to thank Andrea for and Jennifer for organizing the event today, and to Lisa Vandevasi, who she and I have alternated giving this presentation in the past, and so our, you know, our content hopefully complements each other, but some of the content is from her as well. Okay, a few quick housekeeping things. As you saw, we're recording the workshop and the slide set and the recording, as well as all those, a handout of the slides, and as well as the other handouts I've created will all be available to you. And I already mentioned the second workshop on interviewing and post-interview communication, which both of which, you know, I think deserve unique focus, and there's a lot of stress that comes around that, especially post-interview communication. Short story is that it's very different than for residency application. So just that, and I mentioned the new handouts. I also want to mention that I'm currently in the middle of scheduling subspecialty application session. So that this is with the subspecialty fellowship director. And so far, all but 3 fellowship directors have gotten back to me positively that they are willing to schedule these for you guys. They will be, most likely, they will be during the month of May at various times, various days rather, not all synchronous. So you could even go to more than one if you're still weighing different specialties. And they'll likely just be an hour, hour and a half, and a time for you to get, to build on what I'm going to tell you, which is more generic, and then have the fellowship directors or associate directors be able to give you more specific advice on applying to that specialty. So, so look for an email probably within the next week as I get all these finalized. You know, we heard, you know, it's interesting, just we used to do these, when we used to do this workshop live, we would invite the fellowship directors to come and usually at lunch, and they would all break out at different tables and you guys could eat your lunch with them. And then gradually the interest in that kind of waned and we stopped doing that. And it was also hard for fellowship directors to sometimes come all the way to wherever we were having the workshop. And then lo and behold, only 0 or 1 resident was interested in that fellowship. So, so actually this is where Zoom's going to help us. We heard from applicants last year, they wanted us to restart these, and the fellowship directors were like, yeah, by Zoom, great. And then just let me know how much, if no one signs up for my specialty, we'll just cancel it, you know, kind of a thing. So again, look for that to follow. All right, so again, for today, sort of an overview of the application process. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about personal statements, call those out uniquely. And then we'll have our panel discussion and from some recent veterans who've been through the match, Cassie and Emily and David, who graduated two years ago, I think, but who was in the match this past year. So they'll be joining us at 3 o'clock. And what I really hope to do is for you to learn about, you know, the fellowship, how to decide on fellowships, how to apply to fellowships, what's the timeline, and I want to be able to frame some of the application components specifically for you. If you take away only one message today, hopefully there'll be a few more, but if you take away one, it's that even though there are some similarities, you're mostly going to use Eris, it's a match, but mostly applying to fellowships is different than applying to residency. And you have to sort of get your head around that a little bit. It's more focused, it's more narrow, and the approach to programs is a little different. And so again, there will be some things that feel the same, but it is a different process. And so I want you to sort of be thinking about that. You know, some residents struggle with when to apply for fellowship. Do I want to fast track? Do I want to, you know, go straight from residency into fellowship? Do I want to take a gap year? And there are so many factors, professional and personal factors, that go into this. It's hard, again, to give really specific advice, but with the exception that if you're going to apply, be certain you're ready to apply, because it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of cost, and so you want to be sure that you're ready to embark on it. It's really common nowadays to take a gap year, way more common now than when I was in training. Those gap years can look very different. There's a lot of options. You can be a chief resident. Actually, so I guess I was a chief, and so I had a quote unquote gap year. Or you can work as a hospitalist, a general or a subspecialty hospitalist. Some people do locums, some people travel, some people work in a private setting for a while. If you're away from academia, and we have plenty of residents who've not just been an academic hospitalist for a year or two and then applied, but who've been in the private sector or who've done other things. Absolutely, you can do it and be extraordinarily successful. But talk to your mentors about how to plan for that. You know, if you want to do a year or two with MSF, or if you want to go up and work in Alaska for a year or two. Totally, I want to encourage you to do those things if you want to do them, because now is the time in your career to do that. But your strategy for applying to fellowship will be a little different depending on what it is that you want to do. I get this question a lot. I really want to apply now, but my scholarship isn't all packaged up and completed and submitted, and I think I need another publication or another abstract before I apply. Again, this is very subspecialty, and even within a subspecialty, very program dependent. And so getting subspecialty advice on this, if you're a little worried, if for example, if you want to apply to competitive research-oriented fellowships, you might want to be, have a little bit more scholarship on your CV, and you might want to take a gap year, one that allows you time to do some more research. But if you're in a less competitive specialty or looking for a non-research focused fellowship, then maybe you don't need to worry about that at all. So again, individualize. You have to individualize that decision and get good advice about that. So now where to apply is another can of worms, so to speak. And I would say, what I want to say is that I think geography plays a bigger role than perhaps it did when you were choosing your residency program. Not that geography didn't matter, but the truth is that you are going to wind up going into practice. What are the data, Jennifer? It's like 75 or 80% of people go into practice within 50 miles of their last point of training. So wherever you go for fellowship, you should know that statistically, at least, you are very likely to stay there, unless other situations arise, of course. And again, quite honestly, as people get older and further along in their training, they become more and more interested in, okay, already, I'm tired of moving all over the country. I want to, put down roots. So think about geography carefully for fellowship training. You also really want to consider your career goals. Your career goals are going to drive a lot of this, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. And then you have to think about the program's goals and strengths and weaknesses. More so than at the residency level, there sometimes is a disconnect, or there's not always as linear a relationship between the prestige of the institution and the prestige of the fellowship program, or prestige might not even be a good word, but the quality. And that just because a place has a great residency program doesn't mean that in your specific subspecialty area of interest that it has as great a fellowship program. And the reverse is true. There are some places that have residencies that might not have everything that you're interested in, but their fellowship might be amazing. And so you really have to look at the specific programs. How to do that, look at websites, get lots of advice, talk to people who've interviewed recently, either fellows who are in our program because they just recently went through this and looked at fellowships elsewhere, most likely, or our current residents and chiefs who've matched into programs and who last year were going through this interview process and we're looking at programs. That is a very rich source of advice for you. And then, of course, the APDs, me, I've learned a ton about fellowship programs over the years. Kelly has heard a lot about fellowship programs over the years. And then, of course, we're setting up these sessions with the subspecialty fellowship directors, and they can often tell you, sometimes it feels a little awkward talking honestly to them and asking them what they think of a competing program, but most of them really want the best for you, and most of them really will try to give you good advice about other programs. A couple of special circumstances, yes, you can couples match in the fellowship match, but with certain caveats. In order to couples match, the programs have to be in the exact same match. So there's a medical specialties matching program, and the fellowships have to be in the same match, the same, umbrella specialties, so that if two partners, if one's in cardiology and one's in renal, if you want a couples match, totally, you can do that. If one's in adult ID and one's, I don't even know if there's a peds ID, I made that up last night, but pick a pediatric specialty. No, you can't do that because they're actually different matching programs. And Johnny Hormozdi grappled with that last year, where he was matching into cardiology, and his partner was looking at pediatric fellowships. And then, of course, across specialties like gastroenterology and anesthesia subspecialties, you can't couples match in that area either. Visas do sometimes matter. So if you're on a visa, visas can impact fellowship programs' ability to sponsor you or to fund your salary. The clinical part of the fellowship they can fund, but it's the T32, the training grant, that sometimes has restrictions on visas. And we've had residents who are in our program who are here on visas who really had to limit their fellowship search to places that were willing to fund them off of a grant. So be a little bit wary of that. So back to career goals, because this is super important and is going to drive everything. You really have to think more concretely, perhaps, than at the last level, than at residency application. What are my downstream goals? Do I want to have a clinical career, primarily a clinical career? Because there are different fellowships that will train you better than others for clinical careers. And even within a clinical, or you have to decide whether you want an academic career. Because again, there are fellowships that are more academically oriented. And if you know you want to have a clinical career, then applying to a very academically focused fellowship that doesn't have a clinical track, may leave you, not as happy. Now, within these, of course, you can have a clinical career, but want to work in a practice setting outside of academics, or you can have a clinical career and still work in academics, not be doing scholarship per se. And there are people in our system, for example, in my specialty, Lawrence Ho, I don't know how many of you have run into him. He's on interstitial lung disease doc, and he's a full-time clinical faculty member. He just does pure clinical work, doesn't attend, on the inpatient services. And you really only bump into him if you do clinic at the U in the ILD clinic. But so he's working in an academic setting, but he has a very clinically focused career. And he did his fellowship for pulmonary, even though he came back here to join the faculty. And he's a grad of our program, by the way. He went to Stanford for his fellowship training as a much more clinically oriented fellowship in pulmonary medicine. On the academic side, of course, that doesn't always mean laboratory-based research. It could be clinical research. Maybe you want to be a clinician educator and do education scholarship. You know, absolutely, those things are all academic careers, but there are different programs within each specialty that will best train you for these various boxes. And so I think it's really helpful to think that through and be honest with yourself about that. So other factors, we talked about location and geography. We talked about training goals, your support system, and that comes into play. But then you want to look at the individual program strengths and weaknesses. And that's harder to find. You know, you can look at websites, and a good website will call out what the program is really focusing on and what they're strong at. Again, even within a certain subspecialty, you know, like cardiology, for example, there will be some programs that just don't have much adult congenital heart disease. That's not one of their strengths. But if that's one of your interests, you know, you need to know that about that program, at least before you rank them. And so, so it's hard. You have to try to get this information. Websites, there is a database called FRIDA. I don't know how many of you were familiar with FRIDA from applying to residency, but FRIDA is the Fellowship and Residency Electronic Interactive Database. And you can go into FRIDA and look up various programs and learn lots of details about them. So that's a place to look. Again, your advisors, both your internal medicine advisors, faculty, fellows, chief residents, and the subspecialty advisors. And then on interview days, and we'll cover interviewing, as I said, more over the summer, but on the interview days, you really want to learn to tease this out. What questions do I really need to ask, about individual strengths and weaknesses, and where do graduates go, and what do they, you know, wind up focusing on in their careers. Society meetings are not happening in person this year, but if you get a chance to go to a subspecialty, you know, society meeting because you've submitted an abstract, there's tons of ways at those meetings to learn about the various training programs and people to meet and talk to. So that's another source for you. Here's an example of our pulmonary fellowship website. This is actually from last year. So, you know, they say, we offer excellent clinical training. Well, that sounds good, but an unparalleled breadth of research opportunities designed to prepare young physicians for a successful career in academic medicine. And I think you can tell from the way they phrase that, that's their goal as a fellowship program, is to train academic physicians. And you know, again, following a fellow's initial year of clinical training, the focus shifts to research. And they talk about then their research tracks and additional training and professional development. So, you know, you can really sort of see, and if you dive deeper, you know, and you'll also see that the pulmonary fellowship has a clinical track also here at the U, but you wouldn't necessarily know that without going deeper into the website. And perhaps Cassie can talk to you a little bit about that, since she matched into the clinical track in the UW Pulmonary Critical Care Fellowship. Here's the cardiology. Here's the cardiology website. Again, from a year ago. We are committed to training. We are committed to training exceptional clinicians and future leaders in cardiovascular medicine, and take pride in the fellow achievements in clinical care, education, and research. You can see how the research part, while it's still very much a part of the fellowship, you can begin to see that the way the fellowships phrase these, it changes the emphasis, what they emphasize in their fellowship training. So those are various ways to really start reading these websites critically. Now, I alluded to this a little bit ago, but you also have to understand, as we start getting into the nuts and bolts of application, that there are different fellowship matches. And this can get really confusing, although fortunately in internal medicine, more and more specialties are now participating in the medical specialties match, or the MSMP. And you can see that list of specialties. Critical care medicine is new this year. They were not in the match in previous years. That's critical care only medicine, by the way. And what else is new? Sleep medicine is new this year. Sleep medicine used to be in its own independent match. And so had its own separate timeline, but they have joined the main match. There are non-medical specialty matches. If you're interested in going into medical genetics or sports medicine, which we, every few years we have someone who's interested in those things, it's totally a separate match. And then there are programs that still want you to apply through Eris. So you go through the whole Eris thing, but that are not participating in the NRMP, in the match. And addiction medicine for internal medicine is one of the important ones there. It was just apparently a lot of national discussion about whether addiction medicine programs wanted to participate in the match or not. But at least they're all using Eris now. In the past, they all had their own individual application forms. And then there are these non-Eris, non-matching fellowship programs: GIM, General Internal Medicine Fellowships, Global Health Fellowships, Hospital Medicine Fellowships. And it's hard to cover each and every one of these different matches. I'll focus, as we go further, mostly on the medical specialties match. I do want to encourage people, though, if you haven't already, to think about some of these other fellowship programs. If you're really interested academically in being a general internist, but you do have specific scholarly interests, that these fellowships, can really be great. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you see some of the GIM fellowships that our graduates have recently gone to. Right here at UW, the VA Health Services Research and Development Fellowship, Michigan, UCSF, Stanford, Hopkins, Brigham, UCLA. These are all GIM fellowships that our folks have gone into in the last few years. We have our own Rural and Global Health Fellowship, and we've had people who are in and going through that fellowship. And then there are hospital medicine fellowships, and I separate these out a little bit from GIM fellowships. It might not be totally fair, but the ones I've listed under GIM fellowships, those are mostly scholarly, research-oriented, health services-oriented type of fellowships, where you really learn a lot, you build your skills in health services research. The hospital medicine fellowships, some are more clinically focused, some are QI, patient safety focused, and there are some that are medical education focused. That doesn't mean that you can't want to be a hospitalist and go to one of the GIM fellowships because you want to do health services research and you want the stronger research skills. And then, of course, we've had residents periodically go to the CDC or go to Doctors Without Borders over the years, and those are great training opportunities as well. So let's focus mostly on the medical specialties match, since that's what most of you will enter. So here's the current timeline as I understand it from current websites. On June 10th, you can purchase your Eris token, and you can register and begin filling out your application and collecting your various documents. On July 7th, that's when you can start submitting your application and begin applying to specific programs. This year, it's a little delayed, only by a week, but it's delayed. Fellowship programs won't be able to begin reviewing your applications until July 21st. And then between July 21st and September, programs will have their individual application deadlines. They will tell you, we'll start reviewing applications July 21st, but August 15th is the last day you can apply to our program. And those are very specific, and and those programs deadlines vary, so you have to check the various websites. November 17th is the Rankless submission deadline, and December 1st is match day for this coming cycle for the fellowship. And again, other than being off sometimes a week or so, these are the general dates that seem to apply year to year. So again, June 10th, you can purchase your token. July 7th, you can start submitting, and July 21st, programs can view your application. And our recommendation is that you have your application complete by July 21st. Fellowships start reviewing applications, and they offer interviews on a rolling basis. And so you don't want to wait until August 1st to submit your application, because they may have already decided on half their interview slots. So in order to have it totally complete, knowing that it takes a little time for Eris to get all the documents uploaded, we're advising you to tell your letter writers to have their letters of recommendation done for you by July 7th. That gives a few extra days to buffer, and nag, and then at least a week for Eris to upload the document and get it all properly assigned. And I would suggest that you submit your applications by July 14th to give, again, a week for everything to sort of be ready for programs, fellowship directors to start reading your files. So those are sort of the recommended dates for this coming spring and summer. And then, of course, I already mentioned this, but with regards to the Rankless deadlines and match day, but the interviews generally take place August through October. I used to say that September and October were the biggest interview months, but that seems to be moving up a little bit into August, and you may hear that from some of our panelists. If you're in one of the other matches, like medical genetics, for example, the dates are a little bit different. So, all right. Questions about that timeline before I move on to specific components? Anything in the chat? See if I can. Okay, great.
Hey, Ken, are you going to touch on how many programs people usually apply to and how many interviews people do? I assume it's specialty dependent, but.
Yeah, it's very, I don't have a slide on that, but Annie, was that you?
That was me.
Yeah, I thought I recognized your voice. So it's very specialty dependent and also personal flexibility dependent. That's not good English, but I think you know what I mean. In the competitive fellowships, and the most competitive fellowships, and by competitive, I mean the most number of applicants, you know, and the ratio of applicants to fellowship spots, cardiology, GI, actually it's GI and then cardiology, and then I think pulmonary critical care. They're ballpark telling people to apply somewhere in the 6 to 12 range, depending on your own personal needs. It's not 30 programs like some people do at the residency level. Now, there are some people, though, who apply to those competitive fellowships, but who know they can only be in California, or they have to stay here in Seattle because of family or partner or personal choice. And then, of course, you're limited. And, you know, there's the residents call it suicide matching. You know, you only apply to one fellowship program because you have to be in one city, and that's the only fellowship program in that city. And that's a risk. Now, in the less competitive fellowship programs where there are more fellowship slots than there are applicants, endocrinology, rheumatology, nephrology, even ID to some degree, you may not need to apply to 10 or 12 programs. You might apply to, you know, 4 to 6 programs. And again, some of it also depends on what you're looking for individually. The other thing, just with take this with a grain of salt, because I always seem to recommend applying to fewer programs than residents actually wind up applying to. And I get that. But you know, but you really want to be able to go on 6 to 8 interviews. And so to get 6 to 8 interviews, you might have to apply to 12 programs, something like that, again, for the more competitive specialties. Annie, does that help? And then, of course, you're going to get specialty specific advice, but I hope that at least puts it in a ballpark. You know, I know people who've said, I can only be in Boston for X, Y, or Z reason. And so therefore there's only 4 I'm only going to apply to 4 programs, Tufts, BU, Mass General, and Brigham. And, you know, and they apply to 4. And the statistics are that from our program, you're going to get into one of those 4. Most of our graduates get into their first choice, something like, you know, 75–85% of our applicants get into their first choice. So, so anyway, I hope that helps ballpark it. Okay, various application content. Everybody sort of, you know, I think everybody knows, most of you probably know, you got to do an Eris application. You have to register with NRMP. You have to do the application in Eris. You have to write a personal statement. You have to get letters of recommendation. And what some people are surprised by is the fact that they also have to get their medical school transcript and their dean's letter. And this means leaving some time to do those things because, of course, there's time needed for those schools to submit. Now, they don't submit to each individual program. They just submit to Eris, but you have to reach out and contact them. Fellowship programs want your USMLE and or your COMLEX USA transcript. You need a photograph. And if you're an international graduate, you need your ECFMG status report. So there are other things to think about besides just filling out the application and getting some letters. There's a really super helpful page on the Eris website. It's not hard to find, but I have put the link here. They call it the website is Tools and Worksheets for Fellowship Applicants. And there is literally, you can print out the PDF, a checklist, with check boxes for each step. And you can just, and that's super helpful. And you can just keep, track of everything on there if you're interested. There are some costs to this, some hidden costs. And so this is what, as best I can tell from the various websites for this year, it actually is a little bit more than last year. But again, take this with, if fees change, they may change a little, probably not too much. It costs $145 to get your Eris token. And there's an Eris fee of $115 for your first 10 programs. And then every additional program costs more. So from 11 to 20, it costs $15 each, and it goes incrementally up. I presume as a disincentive to just apply to a lot of programs, but, and I don't know anyone well, I can't swear to this, but I don't know of anyone who's really applied to, 30 or more programs for fellowship training, but the cost can add up. Obviously, the fee for your transcript and your dean's letter varies school to school. Some are free, some have small charges. There is the $80 fee to get your USMLE or COMLEX submitted. If you are gonna, then when you register for the match, there's an $85 fee. And then if you couples match, a $45 additional per partner fee. And then of course, if interviews are in person this year, there's the flights and the hotels and rental cars. And so last year for non-in-person interviewing, these fees added up to $300, $400, $500, not a huge amount. But when people travel to interview, they can sometimes spend, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, depending on the number of programs and whether or not they can coordinate trips to different cities. And so, so just be aware of some of those additional costs for that. Let's talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. When asking a faculty member for a letter of recommendation, make sure you have for them an updated CV for you. Because they're going to want to refer to that as they write your letter. It's really helpful for the letter writer to have even just a draft of your personal statement, even if it's not finished. Because we don't want to say anything about your career goals that contradicts what you're going to say about your career goals. And so it's not that we're looking to necessarily critique the personal statement, although most people are happy to give advice, but it's really just so that we can align what we say in our letters with what your career goals are. And then you're going to give the letter writer, send it electronically. I have here in an addressed envelope. Now everything is electronic. The form for us to be able to upload your letter, and then give us time to write your letter. And often, even though it doesn't seem like it should, but it often takes several weeks to sort of, get these letters done, just the inertia of getting started. But then give us a deadline. And that deadline, I think this year should be July 7th. So that, again, there's a little buffer, but also time once they upload the letter for it to get assigned to your applications. And I think I know I like doing this when I write your letters. Try to meet with your letter writers, even just for 10 minutes by telephone or Zoom, just so we really understand your career goals and if you have a research focus, so that we can just put a, you know, a liner in your letter about that, and, you know, any other intangibles that we want to know that might be helpful to know when writing a letter, like maybe why you want to be in a specific geographic region, or things of that sort. And then we will upload your letters directly to Eris. The residency program does not serve as sort of a central service. For the actually, great caveat, for the program letter, which I'll get to in a minute, actually Andrea helps a lot with uploading those program letters. But your other letters of recommendation, don't have the letter writers send it to the program office. It's not centralized like it was when applying to residency. And again, you create this request in Eris, and then this instruction sheet, I'll show it to you in a second, with a letter ID and a link, you know, gets emailed to us, and then we log in and register and access the portal and directly upload the letter as a PDF file. And then the letter is sent for download, you know, to the various programs. We have the ability to go in and upload revisions or even withdraw a letter if you, you know, don't want us to submit for some reason, but we can do that ourselves. So, letters of recommendation. Most programs want 3 letters. Some programs will allow up to 4. Be careful about this, because if a program only wants 3 and they limit it at 3, Eris is not always smart enough to know if 4 letters get uploaded, which one to drop. And you want to be in control of that. So if the University of Michigan says only 3 letters, then just make sure you assign the 3 you want to go to that program. So one program, virtually all fellowship programs want an official residency program letter. It's kind of like your departmental letter when you are applying to residency. And either I write that directly, or more commonly, your APD will write your letter of recommendation for fellowship, and then I co-sign all letters to sort of add the, you know, imprimatur of the residency program, so to speak. And so, so for example, if Jennifer is your APD, Jennifer will write your letter of recommendation. She'll send it to me. I add in some of my program director stuff, and then co-sign the letter, and we directly upload it. There are some residents every year that come to me directly and ask me to directly write it, maybe because we've worked together more than you've worked with your APD, and that's totally fine. But most of you, you know, will have your APD write the letter and then get sent to me, and we finalize it and upload it as the official program letter. Now, the other 2 letters, or sometimes a 4th letter, differs a little bit depending on whether you're applying to an academic fellowship program or a clinical fellowship program. If you're applying to an academic fellowship program, you'll have your program letter, and then you want to have a clinical letter from someone in that subspecialty that you worked with, and then you want to have a research or scholarship mentor letter. So a program letter, a clinical letter, and a scholarship letter. If you're an MD, PhD, you probably want your PI to write that, because they probably know your research skills the best. If you're going to send a 4th letter, sort of a wildcard letter, it can either be clinical, a second clinical, or a second scholarship mentor. But that's what you want for your first 3. And then, of course, if you're applying to a clinical fellowship program, you'll have your program director letter, and then 2 clinical letters, 2 faculty that you worked with clinically in that specialty. And then if you want the additional letter, you know, it can also be either clinical or scholarship. So it's when you think about who to ask to write your letters, you know, titles help. A full professor, you know, carries a little more weight than, you know, than an instructor. But don't get carried away by that, because it's actually most important to have a letter written by someone who knows you really well. A letter from a full professor who's an expert in the field, but who doesn't know you very well, you know, you can, you know, that phrase, damned by faint praise. You know, if they don't know you very well, they may not be able to write you a very strong letter, even though they may be a very famous person. It's more important to have someone who knows you well write your letter. So yes, titles matter, but please prioritize you know, having someone who knows you well write your letter so you're not damned by faint praise. This is what, and this is probably small for some of you to see, this is what the Eris letter request form looks like. This is actually from 2016 when Mitra Barahimi, one of the GI attendings now in our system, was applying to fellowship. And it, please put my name in. By the way, if you're gonna have your APD write your letter of recommendation, since I'm gonna co-sign it, please use my name as the person who the letter is from, because that will be recognized by readers on the other side as, oh, this is Ken Steinberg, this is the program director letter from the University of Washington. And so have this form sent to me. You can see, you can check the box, I waive my right to see the letter. You can do I do not waive, but please strongly consider checking the I waive my right to the letter. And then on this side, you see it'll have your AAMC ID number, your name. This is a unique Eris letter ID right here, and that will target my letter to you. And then the specialty is gastroenterology, and we have to identify that as well. So that's what we see on our end after you have that sent to us. And as I said before, you enter our information in Eris, and then we upload the PDF document, and then Eris appends it to your application. So that's kind of how that works. All right, moving on to personal statements, and then we'll take a break. Personal statements, definitely different than residency application. I love reading your residency application letters and really learning more about you as a whole person. But fellowship directors, they constantly tell me that you guys write too much and to pare it down. Programs mostly want to know your career goals and what you want to do with the academic portion of your fellowship if you're applying to an academic fellowship. It's helpful for them to figure out who they might pair you with when you interview, or even if the program has what you're looking for in a career. And then, yes, say succinctly what inspired you, you know, to a certain fellowship program, but you don't have to convince them that you're interested in applying to that specialty because you're applying. They say, we know you're interested. And so short and sweet, 2/3, 3/4 of a page, maybe up to a full page for these personal statements. And a little bit tongue in cheek, but write a draft of your personal statement and then delete the first paragraph. Because invariably, there's a patient story in your first paragraph. And I don't think you need those as much for fellowship application. You don't need to, again, convince them of, you know, how you fell in love with that specialty. They know that you are. They're looking to see your writing ability because of scholarship potential. And they're looking for your career goals, what you actually want to do with your career. Vague statements like this: I ultimately want to work in an academic setting, doing research, teaching, and clinical work. That may be true. That may really be what you do want. But those statements are vague and completely fellowship directors tell me those statements are completely unhelpful, because if you are in an academic setting, you are going to do all three of those things. So they really, suggest being more specific. So two other examples here. If you're looking for a research track career, my goal is to ultimately be an independent investigator with a research program focused on breast cancer or whatever. Or as a clinician educator, my goal is ultimately to be a clinician educator with a clinical focus in interstitial lung disease and an educational focus in curriculum development. So try to be specific. It's fellowship directors find that way more helpful.
Again, there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
If you are someone who decided late or changed your mind in residency, so i.e. if your CV reads ID, but then you ultimately apply to Pulm Crit, should you address that in the personal statement?
Yes. Especially if your research was in ID and then you applied to Pulm Crit. You definitely want to say that. Your scholarship in one specialty can apply as the scholarship can still apply to a different specialty. Again, what fellowship directors mostly tell me is if you're applying for cardiology, they don't care that your research was in diabetes. What they're interested in seeing is how successful were you doing research? Did you know how to ask a question, design a study, collect data, write up the results, and transmit information? Because that skill set will apply regardless of your specialty. So don't worry that if your research is in one area and then you choose to apply in a different area, don't worry about the research, but you do want to probably call it out in your personal statement that the reason your research was in one area was because you thought that was what you were initially interested in, and now so does that answer the question? Hopefully.
Sounds like a good answer.
Good. So again, kind of 2/3, 3/4, or a full page, the career you want, and be as specific as you can at this stage of the game. Fellowship directors know you sometimes change your mind, but what you want to do now, be as specific as you can be. How do you know you want to do that? Address the elephant in the room. Perhaps it's what we just talked about, that you changed course somewhere along the line. What you need next: I need training in clinical research and clinical trial design and analysis. What are your learning goals for your fellowship? And then how that particular program might fulfill the need. And that suggests you're serious about that program. It doesn't always have to flow in exactly this order, but those are sort of the guidance for 4 points for your personal statement. The personal statement lets programs know why you're interested, not just in their specialty, but in their program and what you ultimately hope to accomplish in your career. You do sometimes want to call out major items from your CV that might not be otherwise obvious, or other life experiences or skills that also may not be sort of adequately reflected in just a sterile CV. And again, you want to explain away any lapses in training, or lapses is not a good word, but should be gaps in training, unusual circumstances. It's really best to just address these outright rather than have fellowship directors, wait a minute, there's 1.5 years missing in here somewhere. What did the person do during that time? Don't let their minds wander. And if you need help, talk about that first with your mentor about how best to phrase some of those things. Personal statement, as I said, also helps the program prepare their targeted interview questions for you, and to assess how well you'll add to their department's overall goals. Some other personal statement advice, you know, if you're not interested in a research career, own that, sell it. Get some advice on how to phrase things, but there are absolutely really strong fellowship programs out there that want to train clinicians who want to be outstanding clinicians. And so it may change the number of programs or the specific programs you apply to, but I think you just need to be honest and with yourself, and then sell yourself as best as you can. Yes, you can upload multiple personal statements, just like with residency. You can have fellowship personal statements that target MD Anderson and Dana-Farber and the Hutch, and and different programs based on their strengths. Just be really careful, because I've seen this at the residency level, and fellowship directors have seen it too. If you write a letter targeting OHSU, don't send it to the UW. That seems obvious, but just, and then good writing skills, use active voice, action words, not passive voice. Not, it would be great, to have a career doing QI in nephrology. Flipped around, say, I plan a career in nephrology doing QI work. Don't be vague. I talked about that already. Depth better than breadth. And, always good advice. Be a little careful about controversial topics. But it's definitely okay to talk about issues and experiences that are important to you and that have shaped you, because that will help you find the best programs for you. So here's an example, and again, small font. Let's see. This is an example of a physician scientist letter, someone who wants to be a laboratory investigator. I'll give you a second just to read through it. This is available on our website, though. I literally just copied the PDF and pasted it into this slide. The first paragraph talks about the evolution of their scientific interest and their plan for future science. Boom, right? I aim to continue investigating the balance of tissue remodeling and repair, and fellowship goals, the specialty interest, and then the institutional interest, what draws them to that specific institution. And then an example of someone interested more in clinical research as a clinical investigator, and some of these are slightly redacted, so it's not totally obvious who wrote them, but you can see the interest in the specialty now coming first, and then the evolution of the academic interest. Evidence of aptitude and plan for the future coupled with the institutional interest, but 4 paragraphs and really 3/4 of a page. Okay, that's what I plan to cover formally today. It, in and of itself, it's still a lot, and it's probably a bit daunting. Please don't worry too much. As long as you're on the right timeline, you're going to do well. Our residents do incredibly well in the match. There are a lot of fellowships around the country really look to our program as one of their feeder programs. So I just want you to know that We have a history of doing exceptionally well, and the odds are strongly in your favor. Start planning now. Repeat after me. Make sure your application is submitted by July 14th to give that week buffer before the 1 week buffer before the programs can download your applications, so that everything's complete. You really, I can't emphasize, this is another one of the major points. I can't emphasize enough. You want your application complete by the time the fellowship directors can start looking at it. Invariably, someone calls me panicked because one of their minor letters hasn't yet been uploaded. That'll be okay. As long as the program letter's there, as long as all the other core elements are there, the fellowship directors, can get a good assessment of your application. And then get lots of advice. Come talk to me, reach out, talk to your APD, other advisors, your subspecialty mentors, as I said, chiefs and other people. We are really here to support you and guide you through this process. And some of the advice will be generic, and then some of it will just by nature have to be specialty specific. So, all right, with that, I'm gonna stop, and we have time for questions if you want, but we also have a good 10-minute break before the panel discussion. So anything you wanna ask now, or should we just take a 10-minute break?
I guess if you or anyone else has advice on how to, like, if we're not as research focused and we're looking to make like clinical connections with people who can write us letters and stuff, I've found sometimes trying to get, subspecialty specific electives, and then I've got vacation for half of it and I'm pulled for half of it, and it's hard to make those kind of connections. If anyone's had success or advice on how to do that.
Yeah, I don't know, Annie. If you've you're worried that you're not going to have a good clinical letter because you didn't work with, yeah. Okay,
Annie, that happened to me.
Oh, Sally, there you go. Cool.
I'm here still. That happened to me, and the advice that I was given that worked well was I told the person right off the bat, I am only with you for a week, but I'm really interested in this specialty. Can you please view me as someone who could be a potential colleague, and someone let me know what information you'd need from me or what you'd like to see from me in order to feel comfortable writing a letter. And it was accepted very reasonably and went well.
That's helpful to just be really upfront about it. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful, Sally. Yeah. And for people taking gap years, you have another year to get those clinical rotations also, and you can try to do that in your R3 year, and make some of those connections. And I guess sometimes your strongest clinical letter might wind up being from someone not in that subspecialty, so sometimes that winds up having to be a substitute, but hopefully not.
I had a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was wondering, is it possible to have multiple people write the same letter for you?
Yes. So obviously we do that for the program letter, and we just put the 2 signature blocks at the bottom. And so, yeah, for a research letter or a clinical letter, Rashid, if you had two people who wrote the letter together, as long as it's identified that way and they've both signed it, I think that's perfectly acceptable. You know, sometimes you really do have co-mentors, and the restriction on, you know, maybe in an ideal world, you'd have them each write a letter, but, you know, the fellowships programs are stricter about the number of letters than residency programs. And so sometimes that's a good way to have co-mentors work together on your application. Yeah, Lauren, yeah, June 10th is when you can get your token. I think that was the date that I sent, had in the slides. So hopefully that's right. Oh, looks like Jennifer looked it up too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure what getting a token meant, but it sounds like it means you can actually like log in and start filling it out. So you have about a month to fill things out before you submit. Cool.
All right, let's take a 7-minute break. Be back right smack at 3, and hopefully our panelists will be there. They just went through this, so ask them how they solved all these riddles. Please don't be terribly shocked. Again, as I tried to say at the beginning of my talk, you know, you'll hear different advice from different people, so don't let that shake you too much. All right, see you back in 6 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. I'm Emily Tirtilli. I'm a PGY3. I am going to go into GI at UC Irvine next year. And I think the biggest thing that I wish I had known ahead of time, or I should say that I wish I had lined up, is a mentor or someone you can ask for advice in the very specific field that you're going into, particularly if you're interested in a subspecialty, because I'm very interested in advanced endoscopy, and that's like a 4th year on top of regular GI fellowship. And when it kind of came down to ranking, a big part of my ranking decision was what program has the best advanced endoscopy program and what will kind of set me up the best for the career that I want to have. And I think it's really hard to know that without knowing someone who is in that subspecialty and who you can talk to. And I sort of happened to be able to chat with one of the advanced endoscopists here. But because I was sort of particularly looking at, you know, other programs besides UW and sort of wanting to go back to California, essentially, it was hard to get advice because not a lot of people knew the programs, knew what is good for advanced endoscopy, and could give me good advice about ranking. And so I would say, particularly if you're have like a very specialized interest, try to find someone and ask them ahead of time if you can kind of ask them for guidance with making your rank list, because it's stressful to try to make that decision on your own.
Yeah, and Emily came to me with that question. And I was a very good listener. Well, Emily will tell you whether I was a good listener or not, but I tried to be a good listener and help her ask the right questions, but obviously I couldn't be a source for that specific issue. But yeah, but it sounds like you found the right place, Emily. So that's cool. Cassie, you want to go next?
Sure. I wish I would have gone first because I was going to say the same thing as Emily.
Oh, well, say the same thing. That's okay.
Mine was a little bit less specific. I met with, honestly, like 8 different people in the pulmonary. Oh, sorry. I'm Cassie. I matched into pulmonary and critical care here at UW. But I have a specific interest in palliation and end-of-life care within like the setting of the ICU. And so I met with like 8 different people, not specific to palliation, but just 8 different people who would give me different opinions. I specifically am interested in clinical time in my training. I don't want to do research like in the long run. So I spoke to various people, both people who are clinicians, people who were researchers as well, just to get an idea and a perspective from everybody. And I found that incredibly helpful for me, just because some people were like, hey, this program has a great palliative aspect that's integrated into like the pulmonary critical care fellowship. And so I looked into those programs, and it just allowed me to know various different programs. And a lot of times if you worked with someone clinically and they know different program directors, like they'll say, hey, I can like message this person that I know and just let them know I know a great candidate that's applying to their program. And it's not going to guarantee you anything, but it's nice for someone to like on the interview day be like, oh yeah, actually so-and-so had messaged me about you. They thought you were a really great person to work with. And it just gives you like a nice little, I guess, advantage or a nice little something. I don't know what to call it. But on top of all that, you just get so much more information than you can do just from looking up a bunch of different programs online and trying to get a perspective from them. Yeah. I talked to fellows who had friends that were in different specialties, and I reached out to them like, hey, what do you think of this program? I'm thinking of applying. And just more information just gives you a better opportunity to figure out where you actually fit.
Yeah, and thank you, Cassie. And one quick follow-up to Cassie's comment is, remember when I said that residency, fellowship application is different than residency? There's a lot more of that kind of communication that goes on at the fellowship level than at the residency level, in terms of in terms of mentors messaging each other at other places and people reaching out on your behalf. Yeah, so cool. David, there you are. How about introduce yourself and where you're going and what word of advice you'd have? Yeah.
So my name is David Roach. I matched into infectious diseases at the Mass Gen and Brigham combo program. And if I had one piece of advice, it'd be invest in a good chair before fellowship season, because I think I got about 3 pressure ulcers from Zooming for 8 hours a day, 3 weeks straight. But beyond that, I mean, I think it's very much in the vein of what the others were saying, in that, your fellowship application and kind of training is a lot more specific. And so in addition to having people to talk to, I think it's good to have something to talk about during these interviews, because you're going to have a lot of specific questions from people who are in the field you're trying to get into about what you want to do. And so having, whether or not you end up doing the specific thing you talk about during your fellowship, I think is a fair question, but you should be able to talk about some work that you want to accomplish and the trajectory and track you see your career going in within that specialty. If only just to make the interviews less painful, because you have some specific thing that you guys can discuss. And I was surprised during my interviews, the interviewers often had very specific questions about how can we help you accomplish your goal. I mean, that was the most common question I got. Is what do we have that we can do for you? And I thought that was really cool. I just wasn't really prepared for that. At first, I kind of figured it out, but it helped that I have a good sense of the trajectory I want my career to go. But I would just advocate for people to have that figured out, at least as a talking point, whether or not it's the long-term reality. Be ready to discuss that. And I think it makes you a more interesting candidate during the interview process. That'd be my advice, in addition to what the others are saying. All that's true for sure as well.
Cool. Thanks, David. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yet another difference between fellowship and residency applications. The programs are, I love that, looking to see how they can help you achieve their goals, and residency, it's kind of the other way around, how, so anyway, not that it should be, but okay. What questions do you guys have for Cassie, Emily, and David that you want to ask? And again, use the chat or just unmute yourself. We're not that big a group, that if you just want to unmute yourself and ask questions.
I had a question for David. It's Oyenka. Hi, David.
Oh, hi. Hi, Oyenka.
How are you? Good. I wanted to ask you, because you, at one point, I recall, because I was like your intern for a week in the MICU.
It's great.
And you were thinking about combining infectious disease with critical care medicine. And so I was just curious about ultimately why you decided not to do that, or if that's something you're still thinking about, particularly because it's a less traditional way of, generally we see like critical care alone or palm crit.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I'm still struggling with. Basically, I interviewed for, I only applied to critical care at UW, and they, well, whether this is true or not, what they told me is that they aren't doing any of the 1-year people. They decided to only do the 2-year track of critical care exclusive folks. So they wouldn't have anybody in a combo, cards, crit care, nephrology, ID crit care. And that is just because of availability of slots for clinical time. And so they were the only program I applied to for that because I didn't want to do an extra year at different places. And then as I've interviewed for the ID portion, you know, just talking to different people, and it is actually pretty rare that places will offer a 1-year program. So like Stanford does it, the NIH does it, and a few others do or have done it, but it's not necessarily that every program is always going to have a 1-year critical care slot available. So that's part of it. The other part is that I think it's kind of a historical thing, but generally Pulm Crit or anesthesia owns the critical care time. And so it can be hard to get both clinical time as a critical care doctor and as an ID doctor. And when I was talking to some people who are ID crit care trained at Mass Gen, they, you know, it took them years of effort to get critical care time on top of their other clinical care time. And it's just, it's like, oh, wow. So it's kind of a lot of politicking to get the job, and it may be years down the line. So I'm still thinking about it. I'm actually actively debating whether or not to apply again right now. But it's just hard to make it work, unfortunately, even though I think clinically it makes a ton of sense. But the way the medicine is structured right now, it's tough.
Thanks, David.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll ask a letter writing question. Like, how did you guys choose your letter writers, and anything you learned in that would be helpful for us?
I can answer first. I always knew that I was going to do fellowship since I was an intern. And so I took advantage of feedback time with some of the attendings that I had really good rapport with, asking them like, hey, a lot of times people will say like, can I do anything for you if they really liked working with you? And I would take that opportunity to say, well, I'm actually applying to fellowship in the next 6 months, in the next year, whatever the time frame is. Say like, do you think that you would have the time to write some words about me, or, you know, recommend me? And that's kind of how I did it. I set up people way before I asked them for letters, just to kind of prime them. I did not have a critical care attending, which I had one interview where someone asked me about it. Just based on how my schedule works, like I did critical care as an intern, and then I did it as an R3 after I'd applied to fellowship. And so I didn't have a lot of time in between where I had someone that I worked really well with. So I would just recommend, if you're not able to get someone within that field that you're interested in, just have a good reason why, or just think that ahead of time, because it actually caught me off guard. I didn't think about the fact that I didn't have a critical care attending. And when they asked me, I was like, oh, wait. And I mean, I explained myself and it ended up being fine, but that's kind of how I approach letters.
Yeah, I think I had like a fairly generic route of asking people for letters. I was working with a research mentor as an intern in the second year, or sort of throughout residency. And so I asked her, and then I took a lot of GI electives, like basically as many as I could, and then just sort of, and I specifically targeted UW for my GI electives because I felt like the professors there are sort of more broadly known, and that can be an advantage in your letter writing. And so I did a hepatology block and then asked one of the hepatologists to write a letter. I would say I only had 3, which is kind of the standard number. It's the program director letter and then 2 others. There was one program that asked for 4, and I just submitted 3 and still got an interview. So it seems like it was fine, but just know that sometimes that comes up. So maybe have like a 4th one as a backup or something.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just kind of asked people who I worked with, including Ken, and then a research mentor as well. You know, I was fortunate that I'd had a year of working out in a job before I asked for letter writers, and so that was a natural person. But yeah, otherwise, I think it's just who you've done research with and who you've worked well with clinically.
This is for like all the panelists, but I guess, or maybe for Cassie and Emily, who went straight through, but how did you find the sort of timeline and time course as applicants? If my question makes sense. Like, did you find it felt compressed or rushed, or did you feel, because you were kind of applying on top of your clinical responsibilities too? And so just any like tips or advice you would have for navigating, you know, applying early in 3rd year?
I thought it was okay. I thought it was manageable. I started a couple months ahead of time to just like slowly, like very little, like maybe once every 2 weeks or something, I started gathering information and I started kind of meeting with people in between. So I kind of spread it out over a couple of months. My meetings with people were in the middle of the pandemic, and so everything was via Zoom. So it was very easy to just like do a quick meeting over Zoom with people to talk about whatever your interests are and things like that. So I found it was manageable.
Yeah, I similarly found it to be very manageable. I think it was actually much harder in years past when you had to take 2 days off to go fly to this place. But you know, and I was sort of lucky in my timing of my schedule. I was on day med during the bulk of my interviews, so I just scheduled them all on my off days, and didn't really have any issues with that. I think the timeline is certainly compressed, but it was more compressed from a research standpoint, that you like really had to have your project essentially complete by you know, summer, beginning of 3rd year. But other than that, I think the timeline of the application process itself was very manageable.
And I advocate for everybody taking an extra year or 2.
Of course you do.
Yeah. Slow road. Yeah.
Actually, could you talk a little bit more about that, David? Like the things that you
yeah.
feel like you gained from that, and you know, what it was sort of like to put together an application a year or 2 later?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this was obviously just a pretty wild year to be working in critical care, and that, you know, COVID hit and all that. So from a clinical experiential standpoint, it was pretty unique. But I think what it really has done is kind of, I mean, it's a little bit obvious, but it really teaches you to be independent and to be able to make decisions on your own and feel, if not comfortable, at least confident in your clinical decision making. And I think that is a skill that takes a little time to develop. And I'm glad that I have it developed outside of the specialty I'll be working in, because I think it will it will lend itself well to anything, and I will go back into training with a kind of a confidence and independence I didn't necessarily have before, which I think is helpful. And then I did like being able to talk about the work I've been doing during my interviews. I thought that was helpful. So I didn't think it was a knock against me at all, but it was also, it's a great opportunity to kind of develop independence and, you know, get some money. Like, it is really nice getting paid, and then going back into fellowship, having some savings is definitely going to be nice. So I think it's great, but there's a million ways to skin this cat, and I think whatever works for people is great, but I wouldn't shy away from taking a year or two of independent work.
Must be more questions. While people are thinking, one question that came up earlier that I tried to dodge by saying it's very specialty specific is how many programs you applied to, and then how many programs you interviewed at. Would you be willing to share that? Emily, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I applied to, I was very geographically specific because I really mainly wanted to be in California and really only wanted to be on the West Coast. So I applied to essentially every single program on the West Coast that had a GI program. So it was about 20, and then I interviewed at about 10 or so, somewhere around there.
Yep.
I applied to 14 programs and interviewed at 8. I was not geographically kind of restricted. I was open to any city as long as it was a bigger city. I was moving with my partner, so kind of brainstorming with him where he would be able to find work and where we would both kind of be able to live in. So 14 and 18 interviews. Sorry, 8 interviews.
Yeah. I applied to 14, but I got 18 interviews.
That good. I think ID is a little bit less competitive than the other 2 specialties, and I have a specific focus in wanting to have a genomics kind of component to it. So I only applied to places that had a pretty strong genomics group at the university. So that limited where I applied, and I ended up applying to 7, I think, and got 7 interviews. It's ID, you know.
Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah. But did you do all 7 interviews, or did you?
I did all 7, and then I ranked all of them, and I kind of wish it was fine, but I think if there were some, if I would have matched there towards the bottom, I would have been regretted ranking them.
Yeah,
but I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I applied to 7, interviewed at 7, ranked 7. I guess I applied to 8 because I accidentally did UCSF Fresno by mistake, and then I realized, like, what the hell, Fresno? That's not. And then I had to email the UCSF actual, help, can you let me in? So I didn't interview at that one, but.
Did you meet with or talk to the folks within the UW program, especially if you were thinking other places, and was that awkward or hard, or how did that interaction go?
I would say, yeah. So my person that I ended up chatting to about advanced endoscopy was certainly at the UW program, but not on the admissions committee. Both of my letter writers were on the admissions committee, and so we're here. And so I would say have someone lined up that you can talk to who's not also on the admissions committee, because obviously it's kind of awkward if you're like, well, actually, I really want to be in another state. So, more mentors is always better, especially if you're looking for sort of specific advice outside of UW.
Yeah, I agree with what Emily said, having mentors both in the non-admit side and on the admit side. I actually met with the program director at UW, and it was, I kind of thought about it for a minute, because you can shoot yourself in the foot if that interaction doesn't go as well, but you can also learn a lot. And fortunately for me, it worked out. But it was mostly, I asked her, what are things I should be looking for in a program? I told her what my goals were, what I wanted my career to look like. And then just asking her, like, what are important things that I should look for in a program that are going to kind of help nourish that. And it ended up being a great interaction. I learned a lot from her. She told me some other programs that she thought were, you know, pretty strong programs. If you're interested in like ClinEd, like I'm not, but like specifically she is. And so she could have told me if I was into ClinEd, like different programs that have ClinEd and just stuff like that. You can learn a lot. Just be very careful and make sure that if you do meet with anyone on the admin side, you're very, I guess, you're very intentional with the questions you're asking as to not waste anyone else's time, but to make it feel like you're very well prepared, you know exactly like what you're looking for. And it worked out for me, but it could have very well not worked out.
I didn't have any experiences like that. I was actually not very involved with the ID department here. Even in my research, it was more in the genomics and microbiome side. So I've known our program director for a long time, but I didn't specifically chat with him at any point.
I will just put out there that that I am always available. And it not just for pulmonary applications, but if you are like not feeling sure if you want to ask a certain question of a certain person, or if you want me to sort of ask anonymously for you, I've done that for people. And I'm also happy to just sit and listen to, you know, your thought process and to reflect back on some of the things that you're talking about. I have gotten to know a lot of the fellowship programs. I also know most of the residency program directors at the larger university programs around the country. And sometimes I will reach out to them. They're not connected with the fellowship, but to get some insight. So please feel free to use me. You know, I am available to all of you, not just those of you applying in Pulm Critical Care. So just put that out there. All right. Jennifer, I don't know if you're listening, but any frequently asked questions that you want to chime in with that you've heard people ask in the past that haven't been addressed yet, or?
No, I was just gonna hit the one about kind of how you targeted your numbers and what advice was that based on, if it was advice, you know, from somebody else and not geographic constraints. So I'm thinking about other common questions.
This is Allison. I had a more specific question about the letters of recommendation. I know a couple of you mentioned that you identified a potential letter writer from an interaction earlier in residency or sort of in advance of when you were actually submitting your application. And I'm wondering if any of those people wrote letters for you sort of ahead of time, or if you just planted that seed and then, you know, 8 weeks before submitting your application, you were like, hey there, can I have that letter now? The timing seems a little difficult depending on when you may work with somebody that you really connect with.
I asked my sort of clinical letter writer immediately at the conclusion of working with them, because I felt like sort of the memories of working with me would be the most fresh, and they could sort of write what they wanted to say and then just keep the letter. And I think that was sort of the expected approach. The person who I asked was sort of very happy to write a letter and wrote one right away, and then just said, I'll hang on to it and then let me know when your Eris application opens up and I'll submit it.
I would say that's definitely the way to go. I planted the seed and then 12 weeks before was like, hey, remember me? You said you would be willing to write me a letter, but that's definitely not the way to do it. I think it's definitely best when you're fresh in their minds and they remember all these great features about you instead of like a year later when you pop up from the woodworks.
Remind me what rotation we worked on together. Sorry,
good
David,
advice.
I interrupted you. Yeah.
Oh no, I agree. I got nothing more to add.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Yeah. And from a letter writer point of view, I've actually had people over the years ask me if I would write them a letter, and I will do the same thing, even if I just type up a couple of quick, paragraphs, and then not even on official stationery, just save it, in my computer, and then when I get asked a year later, I have that to fall back on, and then just to flesh it out a little bit. But, so we as letter writers, we don't mind doing it that way. In fact, it helps us too, just like it helps you.
I would say if you've already asked or you've already worked with somebody and didn't ask that, it's not all hope is lost. Everybody's great at UW and they're all super friendly. I would just reach out and say, hey, this is me. Do you want to have a Zoom meeting to kind of go back over things or talk about things? And they'll probably say no, but it's nice just to have the option to reconnect if they want. I did that with my letter writer because I brought it up with him and he said, well, let me know when you want it. And then it was like a year or two later because I ended up doing this job. And he's like, nah, I remember you, it's fine, but I haven't written it yet. So it was anyway, just kind of a way to reconnect.
Cool. Well, while you're thinking of any last minute questions, just to start to summarize, we will do we'll let you know the date, but we're going to do that interviewing and post-interview communication workshop sometime in probably early August, just before. Oh, actually, there's a question. When was your first interview, the three of you? Do you remember what the earliest interview was? Was it as
October?
Early as your first interview was October, David?
I think end of October for me.
Wait, was your first or last?
Oh God, I don't know now. Oh no. That was my last. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
okay.
End of September. Shit, I don't know.
End of September. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Mine started in August, and then we're heavily in September, and then like a few in October. But it's also West Coast, East Coast. West Coast interviews earlier.
Oh
no, you're right. Mine was on my birthday, so September 9th. So beginning of September.
Yeah, I think my first interview was late August through October, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would just say as a last point, this is something that is going to be brought up this interview season. I think if you do it in person versus on Zoom, and personally, I thought the Zoom interviews were just as effective when you're having a meeting with the person itself. If you want to see a place, feel free to go check it out. But I think the Zoom interviews are so much easier for the applicants and just as effective as far as getting a sense of who your possible mentors are there and a sense of the place you're going. That's my personal opinion. And it just saves a lot of time and money and effort.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interviews themselves just felt like regular interviews. I think it was a little more awkward trying to interact with the fellows.
Very much so, yeah.
Like happy hour things were a little forced, but it is what it is. I guess the interviews themselves were very kind of normal and professional and all that.
Yeah, definitely lame happy hours, but fun or equally productive interviews.
Good. That's reassuring. So back to what I was saying, we'll have that interview and post-interview communication workshop. It sounds like we should do it no later than mid-August, is what it sounds like. And and there we'll focus on interview tips and also how to handle the pros and cons of post-interview communication, and likely have another panel with people, how do you actually handle that, and handle it, in a way that feels comfortable. So we'll do that. I will send out, as I said, a PDF of my slides from today. I'll send out a PDF of that residency application handbook. I'll send out not a PDF, but the Excel spreadsheet of the last 4 years, and maybe I'll even throw in an extra year in there, so that you can search that and sort it as you like. Yeah, and then we'll also have this stuff posted on our website, but I'll send it to you directly because we should have everybody who logged in today. So
I think, Ken, the one other thing you and I talked about is just getting approval from those folks, for those who are willing to share their emails, and that when we we will add that to the spreadsheet as well, so you could reach directly out to them if we have a current contact.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, and then I'll let you know within the week or so when those subspecialty fellowship director sessions will be, so we'll get all that going, and yeah. All right. Any final questions? Panelists, Cassie, David, and Emily, thank you so much for
thank you.
Your time and sharing some of your recent experiences. I know they listen to you more than they listen to me, as they should, so I really do appreciate that. Andrea and Jennifer, thanks for organizing all this, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and please reach out if you have any additional questions. And I see the sunshine is out now too. So
enjoy.
Thank you.